Richard Hammond was a man of immense wealth, charm, and pride. He had built his fortune from the ground up, transforming a small construction business into a sprawling empire that spanned cities. He had everything a man could ask for: luxury cars, multiple mansions, and a high status in society. Yet, despite all his material success, there was one thing he cherished above all: his family. His wife, Linda, was a dark-skinned beauty from humble beginnings. The two had met by chance at a charity gala, and Richard was instantly captivated by her wit and grace. Despite their different backgrounds, they quickly fell in love. Their wedding was a grand affair, celebrated by the elite and adored by the public. Linda's down-to-earth nature made her beloved by all who met her, and she was known for her humility despite marrying into such wealth. Everything seemed perfect until the children came. Their first child, Henry, was born healthy and full of life. But there was something that immediately caught Richard's attention. Henry had light skin, too light for someone born to such a dark-skinned mother. Initially, Richard dismissed it, chalking it up to a mix of their genes. But then, their second child, Rose, was born, also with very light skin and hair as pale as snow. By the time Linda gave birth to their third and fourth children, both also albino, Richard's suspicions began to grow. How could this be possible? 4 out of 5 of their children were albino. Their youngest, Evelyn, was the only child who bore his wife's darker complexion. The whispers started soon after. Friends and acquaintances began making sly comments, insinuating that something was off. Richard's trust in Linda began to erode. He had been faithful to her throughout their marriage, yet doubt gnawed at his soul. His inner circle fanned the flames of suspicion, feeding his growing paranoia. One evening, after a tense dinner, Richard could no longer hold back his frustration. "How do you explain this, Linda?" he asked, his voice cold and sharp. "4 albino children? This is not normal. People are talking. They think I'm a fool." Linda was taken aback. "What are you trying to say, Richard? That I've been unfaithful? These are our children." "You expect me to believe that?" Richard snapped. "I'm not blind. This isn't just a coincidence." Tears welled in Linda's eyes as she pleaded with him. "I have never betrayed you. These children are yours, Richard. There must be some explanation." But Richard wasn't willing to listen. His mind was made up. He hired private investigators to dig into Linda's past, looking for any sign of infidelity, but they found nothing. He still couldn't shake the nagging thought that Linda had been unfaithful, despite the lack of evidence. To placate his growing distrust, Linda suggested they visit a genetic counselor. "Maybe there's something in your family history that you don't know about," she reasoned. Reluctantly, Richard agreed. The first visit to the genetic counselor was eye-opening. Dr. Samantha Grayson, a renowned expert in genetics, listened patiently as they explained their situation. She ordered a series of tests for both Richard and Linda. A week later, they returned for the results. Dr. Grayson began explaining the science behind albinism, how it's a recessive gene that can be passed down if both parents carry it. Richard's brows furrowed as she spoke. "I don't have albinism in my family," he said defensively. Dr. Grayson smiled gently. "That's the thing about recessive genes. They can skip generations. You may not have known that you carried the gene, but the results show that you do." Richard's world seemed to spin out of control. He couldn't accept it. "There must be a mistake," he argued. "I want a second opinion." Linda, hopeful that this would clear her name, agreed to visit another specialist. They traveled to another city to consult Dr. Andrew Clark, who came highly recommended. After another round of tests, the results were the same. Richard was indeed a carrier of the albinism gene. Still in denial, Richard decided to confront his father, George Hammond, a stern, proud man who had raised him to be strong and independent. Richard visited his childhood home seeking answers. His father listened carefully, then sighed deeply. "Richard, there's something I never told you," George began. "Your great-grandfather was albino. Court, we never talked about it because back then people didn't understand it, but it's in our bloodline." Richard's heart sank. The truth hit him like a freight train. For months, he had tormented his wife, accusing her of betrayal, when in reality, it was his own family's genetics that had led to the birth of their albino children. But it was too late. In the midst of his accusations and growing paranoia, Richard had filed for divorce. He couldn't shake the fear that Linda had been unfaithful, and in his pride, he had forced her out of their home. She had left heartbroken, taking their children with her. Now, standing in his father's living room, the weight of his actions crushed him. Richard tried to reconcile with Linda, but the damage was done. She had moved on, taking their children to start a new life without him. Richard was left alone in his vast mansion, surrounded by the echoes of his own mistakes. The wealth he had once prided himself on felt hollow, and the family he had cherished was now out of reach, all because he had refused to see the truth when it had been right in front of him. And so, Richard's empire remained, but it stood as a monument to his loss, a reminder of how pride, suspicion, and ignorance can tear even the strongest bonds apart.